Actually, our collections are of the three main East Asian languages: Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, plus Tibetan, Mongolian, and some Manchu, which is not a very it's a small language. So we focus on this area of studies, supporting mainly the faculty and students of UW, but we also support all other users in the Washington state and actually across the country, and actually internationally, because nowadays even books can be loaned across countries through interlibrary loan. So we the library started in 1937. We trace our origin back then, and as of today, we have over almost counting towards 90 years. So actually, it's 86 years this year of history. So we have been really rooted in the community in Washington state, grow with the teaching and research program at the UW. And our collection has over 800,000 volumes, including electronic and print materials. And so we are, as I just mentioned, is a non-English language library. So when you go into the library, you see all these foreign languages. However, our circulation, meaning the use of the checkout of the books, is the number 3 among the 16 branch libraries at UW. So that means lots of use, not only by the faculty and student of UW, actually it's beyond UW campus. So our impact is quite significant. We are, as I just mentioned, is a very one of the old East Asian collections in this country, and we ranked among the top-notch East Asia libraries. We are the one in the Pacific Northwest. So on the West Coast, our peers is Berkeley and Stanford, UCLA. So this library plays a major role in supporting the study and the learning research about East Asia. So, as talking about such a library, we do we have a close connection with our community, actually responsibility for our community, not only supporting the teaching and learning on campus, but working with our communities to, for cultural exchange. And as we talked about, is cultural exchange and also cross-culture understanding, so on and so forth. So in addition to regular library works, we do a lot of culture events and activities working with community. One of the examples, a very well-received project is our oral history project. We worked with the first generation Chinese immigrant in the greater Seattle areas to document their experience. So talking about why I am, what called me to work with this group, our AANHPI community. Seems I don't need to say too much, right? We are naturally part of this group. We feel we belong to this community. We are not only working with, but we are ourselves part of this community. And we share common mission. I feel, lots of values we share. And so I feel very just natural to come to this group. In addition, and recent experience I had actually was the immediate call for me to get involved here. That was recent change, so-called reorganization of our library that reduced our staff by 75%. So that event happened to us suddenly. And however, as soon as that news was out, I heard from Professor Cowley and reaching out to me and extending a warm and helping hands, asking what's going on, what can we do to help? And in addition to this group, there are other community groups showed their support and concern about us. And I see how we are connected and how we are valued by the community. So I know time is limited. I cannot go into too much details, but in general, I feel we all have a responsibility to work together with our community, to strengthen our community, to help each other. I think that's why I'm getting involved. And did I cover all the points, or I missed something?
The second question is, what does it mean to you that we are celebrating AANHPI Heritage this month?
Yeah, sorry, I almost missed that big one. Yes, celebrating is very important. Is to raise our visibility and also an opportunity to tell people about our cultures and to strengthen our self-awareness of our own culture and to be proud of our own culture. So we need to know our history. We need to know our contributions. Celebration is necessary for us to remind ourselves we have a lot to be proud of. We have a long history contributing to building this great country. So that's why I think it's very important. We must celebrate. And thank you. I hope I answered some of the questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Shen. I'll hand it now over to Jill to take on the question, which is to tell us about yourself and what called you to do the work that you do for the AANHPI community, and what does it mean to you that we're celebrating AANHPI Heritage?
Thank you for your introduction. And the thing that I'm doing now is in many ways related to what I have done for many years in other settings. And I think in education and working in acute healthcare and working now in behavioral health, I've always found that and I don't know sometimes whether or not, I think this because I was one of two, we were one of two Japanese families and really one of two Asian families in a small town in California that was predominantly white and Latina. And because my family had been farmers in both directions, and because I grew up in the 60s, still in the shadow of what it meant to be Japanese American. As a West Coast Japanese, both my families have been relocated during the war in various ways. And so I grew up in an era when sort of the assumption was that you knew that by dint of your Asian face, you were going to represent the community and you didn't want to do certain things. And it was pointed out to me, oh no, the mayor of this other town, he did this thing and he's a Japanese American and it makes all the Japanese Americans look bad. There was this consciousness bred partly of the war, partly of my own grandparents who would have been, my grandmothers in particular, who were raised in the tribal 20s 100 years ago. And I think I've always carried that with me, that assumption that wherever I am functioning personally, professionally, that to some degree, whether or not it's fair or not, this is sort of part of who I have to be in the world as I encounter other people, is to be a representative of, one little slice of what is a very diverse set of communities. And I know that, but I think I think that has just always been part of my work. I graduated from law school in the 1980s, went to work for a firm in Los Angeles. Then I moved east and took teaching jobs. And in every setting, I found that I wound up sort of a magnet for affinity groups of students, turned to play leadership roles for what we now call the BIPOC folks in the community, among faculty, and even now in the Pacific Northwest Conference of my denomination as a clergy person in the United Church of Christ. The issues around discrimination, institutional racism in a church that is, nationally probably 85% white, despite a huge presence in Hawaii and the Pacific Islands. That's just part of I think how I've always functioned in the world, and so now, having most recently worked as a hospital chaplain, as a church pastor, and now in my private practice as a mental health provider, I have probably, my guess is, a larger percentage of Asian Americans, many of whom are struggling with not just the questions and issues, the mental illnesses, the family dynamics that all sorts of folks deal with, but often there is an element of their Asian cultural heritage that definitely colors the kinds of questions that they bring. And I think that what I wind up able to provide, and I, it's a case of a dialogue. We are educating one another in some instances, but it's a particular perspective, I think, to sit here as another Asian person talking to an Asian client, as an Asian therapist talking to an Asian client, and it's in a county, because here in Thurston County we don't have that many Asians, and the whole issue of trying to get mental health care awareness and just the initiatives of being able to serve Asian communities in mental behavioral health. It's a huge hole, I think, and it was particularly hard hit for us during the pandemic, the isolation years of the pandemic, and I think we're still grappling with that. I think there's, for me, as my practice is pretty much rolling, and as I look around and I say, where would I feel like I could play a more pointedly leadership role? This is one of those. I think that's a huge need. And so when I think about, what calls me to get involved in this community, I think that's what I would consider the principal draw at this point. And as far as the question of what does it mean to me that we are celebrating AANHPI Heritage Month, I was a history teacher once upon a time, and I grew up conscious of the fact that I was integrating lessons about Asian American history at a time when, we were plodding through the Tudor and Plantagenet kings. And it was a very different focus. It was very Western European, Western Civ focused. And I think to be able to not grow up with the shadow that I grew up of, don't leave your Japanese language newspapers on the dash because you may get your car keyed. Don't put your name on the mailbox because the mailbox may get bashed. I grew up was raised by people who were very conscious of the fact that you didn't want to identify yourself as Japanese. So to be able to learn about the broader Asian communities, to be able to learn about, my own heritage here in the States, to be able to realize that my nieces and grandnephews can all have this, and not be ashamed of it, to celebrate, to acknowledge, and just to learn it as part of who they are. I think that's fabulous, and I get very excited when May rolls around, not just because of all the cool things that come on PBS, but because there is this opportunity. So that's very, very important, I think, for kids to see themselves in the literature they're studying in school, to hear voices. Yeah, I don't know. I thought about it because I was talking to a student, so this would have been probably in the first 5 years of the 21st century, who was asking me how, did I have a lot of just Asian teachers, much less Japanese teachers? And I said I had, and this is still the case, and I have 4 post-secondary degrees. I had one East Asian professor. He was a professor of agricultural economics when I was in college, and it was in a class on the internal combustion engine, which was not related to my history studies, but more because I was interested in internal combustion engines. But in some ways, that is typical, and unless you grow up, in contrast to friends who grew up in Hawaii, the world is just a very different place, Yeah, and so I think it's wonderful that we have an HPI month. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jill. Debbie, your turn.
Sorry. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this panel, and being a part of being able to be in this fabulous conversation. What drew me into this community? I feel like I'm a little bit in a different place than a lot of folks here, in that I'm not actively working with the Asian community, but I am involved in activity, I guess that is identified Chinese, in that I teach Tai Chi and Qigong, mostly to the white community here in town. And before that, I was involved as a grower. I grew Asian vegetables and sold it at the Olympia Farmers Market back in the 80s. And so back then, I was like one of the first people to introduce to the white community here things like cilantro, baby bok choy, and other things that are even less around, like, you know, gailan and garlic chives and all those kinds of things. So I grew up in Southern California, in the suburbs, in the white suburbs, and my parents were immigrants who immigrated after World War II, and before the change in the government there, the communist government, and they came to the United States and were able to reconnect in the LA area with many other good friends from Southern China. And so I grew up with them as my family, and we would meet almost every weekend to eat fabulous food, to play mahjong, us kids just running around and being crazy. And that was my Chinese culture. And they all spoke Chinese. Us kids didn't. You know, it was all like that. Everyone else around me was white. And so it was interesting to me that as an adult, I never would have thought this as a kid, that I would be drawn back so much to doing things reflective of my culture, like growing Asian vegetables and promoting Chinese art in terms of Tai Chi and Qigong. And so it's just interesting to me how my culture is so deeply rooted, and the ways that comes out. As a kid in school in white suburbia, I never really understood why. Like in high school, I had to read Faulkner and all these white authors, and I didn't get it. You know, the teachers really had to explain to me what was going on. I didn't get it because it was not part of my history, my culture, my background. And it wasn't until I was in college and Maxine Kong Hingston, I might have said that backwards, Hong Kingston came out with her first book, Woman Warrior, that I read, and it was like, wow, this is what it's like to read something that speaks to me. And so I've been really attracted to reading Asian authors and women authors and involved in groups and events that are reflective, that I've been able to discover are things that can really speak to me. And so the Asian cultural events really speak to me, and so then I get drawn to them, and I get drawn to all of you. And as much as that we are so diverse and we have so many different backgrounds. We come from so many different places and have so many different experiences. But they speak to me in a really different way than the kind of things that I grew up with. So I really appreciate the organizations, the Asian organizations, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, reflecting all the different cultures. And I just love meeting all the people and learning about and being a part of those different cultures, and meeting all of you and learning about all those things. And so in terms of celebrating and having these celebrations, and in addition to all the things that have already been mentioned about responsibility and pride and history, and being in a different time and place where we can celebrate ourselves, it just also dawned on me too that what it is it has a feel of going home and being around family, because my family is not close by, and a lot of them are older and are gone. And so a lot of my Asian family is from various Asian cultures, and our chosen family, and they're really precious to me. And this kind of celebration, these kinds of celebrations allow us to revel in all of that and meet more people, and expand our horizons and share our histories, share our cultures, and to continue learning. And I really appreciate that. And thank you all for putting in that effort to have that happen.
Thank you, Debbie. That's also one of my favorite authors. Yes, it's definitely a lifelong journey of learning. So next we've got Jasmit Singh. So tell us about yourself, what called you to do the work that you do in the AANHPI community, and what does celebrating AANHPI heritage mean to you?
Thank you, Anjali, and really want to thank Lynn for actually inviting me to this panel. It's lovely to hear all the stories and the personal connection that you have in terms of your journeys. I think each of us become, different people as we go through life based on our experiences. And I think just as you were reflecting on those, I was trying to think about all the things that have happened in my life that have shaped who I've become today. So when I look at, why is it that I'm involved with the Sikh community, doing the work that I do on day in, day out, I think it's an important thing to understand, what my life journey has been. I came to United States as a student for my doctorate. And so that was in 92. And, did the same thing, went through school, got a great job, wasn't living in Washington, but worked in San Diego, went back and forth, and just enjoying what corporate life is, right? Corporate America life. Really enjoyed my profession, was climbing the same corporate ladder. And then in 9/11 happened. And in my mind, that was a pivotal, milestone in my life, or a watershed moment that changed who I became after that. Because I always used to think about, somebody should tell people about who Sikhs are, or somebody should educate them. And that was the day that I realized it wasn't going to be anybody else. I had to stand up and do it for myself, and do it for the others who did not have a voice in the community. So starting with 9/11, when we started hearing all that was going on against the community, being targeted with hate, discrimination, assaults, we started documenting it. We started going out to all the, law enforcement and the governments, and trying to work along with them. And on 9/11 itself, we actually formed Sikh Coalition on a conference call. So it wasn't even incorporated. It was actually a conference call bringing together activists who had never met earlier. So it wasn't like we knew each other. We came together and we started working together. For the next 2 months, we did nothing else, right? We took leave from our work day and night. That was our primary focus, creating the resources, documenting what was going on, talking to the victims of hate, trying to capture as much as we could to help people out. And that was a pivotal moment that really changed me and shaped what I became, because I think after that, this became an extremely important part of my life. I realized that, you can be all visible, yet you're really invisible, right? Nobody knows anything about you. So when I think about, walking down the street and people look at my unshorn hair or wearing a turban, I think that everybody can recognize who I am, but not so, right? They don't understand who I am. They typically have certain perceptions based on media about who I am, what my value system is, and don't take the time to get to know me. So the value judgments that come along with it is a weight that much of the community carries on their shoulders. And as the time progressed, I started looking at different things that the community was actually facing. Of course, the initial thing was the hate crimes and the assaults, and then it moved into basically job discrimination, housing discrimination, and we realized that we really needed to scale. Today, we're really grateful with all the support that we've received from the community and from other grantee organizations. We have about 18 attorneys working full-time in Sikh Coalition, actually working on the advocacy work, the education work, the changing the system. And it takes a lot of effort to make that happen as a national organization. And then somewhere around in 2008, 2009, I realized I needed to also focus on Washington State and really try to do it at a very, at a ground level with the community, talk to the parents, talk to the students, and make them self-sufficient. So rather than they're needing somebody to go to the PTAs, going to the school, making those presentations, they should feel confident that they have to take the ownership of how the next generation needs to interact with the rest of the world. And that became a driving factor for me. How do I make that happen? And from that came Khalsa Gurmat Center, where, again, a bunch of local volunteers came together, who were parents, who were people in the community, and they incorporated that and we started running it. So it's been an amazing journey for me. I actually do have a full-time job outside of the work that I do. So executive director is just a volunteer position, but I love it. I love every part of working along with the community and with all the relationships that we've made with all the other communities and groups and nonprofits over the years have been very endearing. They have been really important relationships. The first actually organization that we interacted with after 9/11 in Seattle was Wing Luke Asian Museum. So lo and behold, an Asian organization really came to our help and said, you know what, we're going to stand. So the first thing, like 3 days after 9/11, they hosted a candlelight vigil in International District. And I can never forget that, right? That importance of that, for them to stand with the community at that moment and say, hey, we understand what you're being, when you are being otherized, we feel it important that we are going to stand with you. And that relationship has lasted all these years. And my feeling is that's what is so meaningful when I look at everyone on the bridge today. I look at our differences, our different languages, our different way of, our different food, our all the cultures that we all represent, and yet there's something very tangible that binds us, right? That binds us is our experiences. When I think about an experience of, a Sikh soldier who was denied citizenship in the early 1900s, even though he served in the United States Army, I can relate to a Japanese American who was denied citizenship for exactly the same reason. You know, when I think about the experiences of the Sikhs serving in the lumber mills or making the railway tracks or serving in the farms, right? How their farms were taken away by the laws that had been enacted by the American government. So I feel those experiences really bind us very innately to each other. And so these celebrations are extremely important, because when I think about our recent experiences of all our communities in terms of what happened after COVID and how the communities were targeted, I can relate it to what different communities felt after, we had an administration that was targeting immigrants. I can relate to the experiences that I felt after 9/11. So I think that common bond that is created is extremely important. What does this celebration mean to me? I think it's just recognizing that our journeys are very, very similar. Right? Our history is very, very similar. We've just never recognized it. We've never really discussed it and tried to find those intersections that exist within our communities. So I'm really thankful to actually be sitting out here and listening to all of you, hearing about your experiences and really learning about what is happening in the communities today. Because quite often we get blindsided by or myopic about what's happening in our community and never get to understand what the experiences of other communities are. So thank you again for giving me an opportunity to participate in this panel. And thank you to all the speakers. It's been wonderful listening to you all.
Thank you so much, Jasmit. I love hearing about the work you've done, and you're absolutely right. The solidarity that just happens at times of need for different communities is very important and telling. And I think we've seen a lot of that over the last few years as well during the pandemic. And next, we've got Rahul to share more about yourself, your journey, about what led you to do the work that you do at the Wing Luke and other areas for the AANHPI community, and about what it means to celebrate AANHPI heritage.
Good evening. My name is Rahul, and I love listening to Jasmit speak. Hi, Jasmit. Nice to see you. Where do I begin? It begins in Cincinnati, Ohio, September 20th, 1973, the same day that Billie Jean King beat Bobby Riggs. My mother's best friend brought a portable TV, even back then, into the hospital so she could watch the match while she was nursing me, having just been born. So I had no choice but to play tennis later in my life. But I didn't grow up in Cincinnati. I grew up in New Jersey, and followed by some tumultuous years growing up in Texas. And the community that I was raised in New Jersey was incredibly multicultural: Puerto Rican, Dominican, Pakistani, Indian, African American, white, European American, you name it. And not to paint a generic swath again on the white, Irish were identified as Irish, Italians were identified as Italian, and so on and so forth. New Jersey, people embrace who they are. Sometimes it reaches the point of chauvinism, and other times it actually works really well. So we leave in 1982 and we go to Houston, Texas, where within 24 hours, I was surrounded by a group of young, same age as me, white European American kids, taunting me and telling me that my skin is burnt because God hates me, and that because I don't look like a Christian, that me and my family are going to hell. And that continued for the 5 years we lived in Houston. It was not just taunting, it was violent. And my sisters weren't spared. My parents weren't spared. Our home wasn't spared. Everything from tearing up my mother's garden and setting it on fire, to fecal matter. But it came to a head for us, and especially for me, the night somebody put a pipe bomb on our car. And I had been hiding, wishing I could wash the brown off my skin so that I could blend in. And it was at that moment that I realized I needed new friends, friends who weren't going to sit idly by as I, attempted to wash my skin of its color. And it changed me in so many different ways. I became a punk rocker, but more than that, I started to read. And when we moved from Houston, I thought it was a breath of fresh air. We wind up in Dallas, but at the time in Dallas, Texas, in 1987, there was an infestation of neo-Nazis. Neo-Nazis and Klansmen were all over the place. Our representative, whose daughter went to school with me, state representative, was seen coming out of a Klan meeting, and this was a normal everyday practice. So I grew very distrustful of white European Americans, and I sought out what I understood to be the opposite. And I found a bookstore on the south end of Dallas called the Pan-African Bookstore, and I lived there. I read everything they handed to me. And if you've ever been in a Black bookstore in the South, you don't just go in and peruse the aisles and not talk to people. You talk to people and you engage in ideas, and you hear ideas being discussed over here. And if you don't chime in, they might think you're weird, because the expectation is, this is what we do with knowledge. We use it, we explore it. And I loved it. And I thank myself, I thank the gods, being Hindu, that I had been given that opportunity. Now, I had not learned anything about Asian Americans in my elementary, in middle school, nor in high school, except for one thing. I learned that Japanese Americans were traitors. I learned that because I was brown, if anything ever happened with, say, the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or the Iran hostage crisis. See, before 9/11, every time something happened overseas that we decided was affected America, or it did affect Americans, the violence turned to me. This is a habit in this country, to continually turn violence on our populations. And as Jasmit had said, it's understanding this commonality. I don't know what it's like to be a Korean American. I don't. But I do know what it's like to have gone through similar things that somebody who's Korean American had gone through. I do understand what it means when, after 9/11, I too was targeted, and I too saw the possibility of being funneled into either a system, a registry, or a camp. And I don't know that many Americans remember that it was Japanese Americans who stood up and said, this will never happen again. And it was Japanese Americans from the Seattle community who were the most vocal. As Jasmit was saying, I had never felt that affinity for other people who weren't of my background. And even though I had gone through and found a way to re-piece together my multicultural experience in New Jersey, to me, that is the America that I was promised. That is the America that I understood to be real. not the America that beats me up or tells me I'm going to hell because I'm not the right religion, I'm not the right color. Some of you may understand this reference. I was called the son of Ham. I don't even know what that means. So, yeah, I chose never to look it up out of resistance. But when you go through my professional work, you actually can see a thread where I center my work in the words and the perspectives of community, where I center the efforts of people who aren't necessarily the leadership, but the people who are leading on the ground, and to be able to promote their voices and their words in ways through independent journalism or nonprofit communications or even political communications. But that wasn't enough. In fact, it sucked my soul out being in that political realm. And I realized I wasn't very good at it. And the reason I wasn't good at it is because of what was missing and what I found coming to the Wing Luke Museum, which, by the way, when I first encountered them and started volunteering for them was in 1995, when I went to school at Evergreen, where Lynn works. And so I know Lynn from back then, but she was only 10. But I remained connected, even though they were so heavily Japanese and Chinese focused, and they had a little smattering of Filipino. But most of my friends who were Asian American were Filipino American. And so, you know, I asked some questions the first time I came to the museum. How come there's not more on the Filipino experience? Well, we're trying, we're doing this. And there was one image of a Sikh man working in a field that said anonymous Sikh agricultural worker. That's it. And when I asked somebody at the museum, and this could have turned me off to the entire idea of the Wing Luke Museum, they said to me, because there's only one picture, because you people weren't here. Now, my scholarship tells me otherwise. And I actually was pretty upset. And I turned to the woman who is now my boss. And I said, what gives? How do people speak with such authority when they have no idea what they're talking about? And she said, you think that because we're a, people of color led organization, that we wouldn't have these same kinds of issues. Even amongst our people, and I've seen it and I experienced it, even amongst our various communities, there's a hierarchy of acceptance and denial, right? And she said, the only way people are going to learn is if you come in and change it. And so it took a long time, but many of us kept pushing the Wing Luke to make that change and include South Asian stories, Sikh stories, Muslim stories, Pakistani stories, Bangladeshi stories, Indian stories, you name it. And we have, to this day, the only pan-South Asian American gallery in the country. We have an Indian American museum near Chicago, right? But that's Indian American. And it's mostly Hindu focused. I'm not about that. I wasn't raised that way. I could go back into my family's history. My family were internationalists. They were anti-British. They were active in various parts of the independence movement. They, my mother's family started sending girls to school, to higher education, to college or university in the 1800s, running our dairy. We had a dairy, and my great-grandfather decided that he was going to send everyone to school because that was the only way to be better than the British. So that was the foundation, and he did it. And he did it by selling milk, right? Neat guy. for his time, extremely progressive. So I come from a very differently minded family to begin with. But I found a place at the Wing Luke that accepts that strange multiplicity of voices and experiences that I walk in with. And I have now a team of educators. I am the education director there, and I have a team of educators from all sorts of AANHPI backgrounds that range from 18 years old to 71 years old. And I sit smack dab in the middle and need to learn how to manage my elders and manage my youngers. I don't know. The growth that I've seen among them, and I'll just speak about them, and this speaks to the importance of celebrating this month. I've never been much for celebrating this month because I'm of the attitude, well, I'm Asian every day. Okay, that's great. But for other people, it doesn't get reflected that way. And I am nearly 50. I am 50. Okay. But my team sat me down during COVID and said, Rahul, we need this. We need to be able to hold it, even if we think it's silly that we only get 1 month. We need to hold it because we still don't have Asian American studies in school. We still don't have enough AANHPI teachers in our schools. We don't have enough administrators in our schools. And as we go through and look at my children's experiences in public school, this year, my youngest has the first South Asian teacher ever. I never had one until I got to college. My wife never had one until she was in grad school. Yeah, that was grad school. It was a while ago. But the celebration to me can't live forever just in that span of May 1st to May 31st. When we're talking about AA and HPI content getting into our schools, that is an everyday occurrence. And as we go through the conversation, I can speak more about that and the importance of it, or at least in my experience, what I've seen. But that's my story, that's my background. It is a background in solidarity. It is a background in attempting to be humble about my cultural roots. I am proud, but I'm no chauvinist. And yeah, but thank you for letting me share that.
Thank you, Rahul. I love hearing about your background, and I've been in several spaces with you, and I appreciate hearing what you went through growing up, and with your family. And thank you for all the work you're doing at the Wing Luke. I think it's a tremendous asset to our community, our Northwest community. And to segue now into education in K through 12, I'm so thrilled for your child that they have a South Asian teacher, because as we know, studies have shown that having educators that look like you, that have similar backgrounds, it encourages academic performance and has a direct impact on that and attitudes towards school. And let's just hope for more and more of that, more representation in education with teachers and staff. And I want to ask the next question to the panelists, and that is, what are your thoughts on why AANHPI curriculum should be included in K through 12? And also, what are your thoughts about that in higher education? I know some of you have already touched on that, and Jill alluded to hoping that that will be the case, that there will be more content for your grandchildren, grandnieces, and so I'm going to open it up, and any of the panelists can chime in. So go ahead.
I I think this is very important. And I remember when my children were in middle school and high school, there was really no curriculum at all on Asian Americans and AANHPI. And so they grown up missing this part of the knowledge, and their view of the world is actually influenced by their education, which missed part of the history. So they grown up with the background, some understanding and not understanding about themselves and about the culture. I am the first generation immigrant. I came from China when come here to do my graduate study. So we have really I have two children. They are born in this country. So we always have an issue how to communicate with them, how to really let them understand our culture, how to communicate our culture to them. And so I think the school to include in the curriculum of the AANHPI experience and will provide the children an opportunity to have a comprehensive, have a full picture of the history that happened to them, and also help them to understand the world. It's very essential for the schools to do that. And that also help combat racism and also build the confidence in the children growing up, recognizing and appreciating their heritage. So that's very important. I think my older son, when he first realized, because when we lived in Colorado when they were young, and in school, he was the, I think, only non-white I think there were two non-whites in the whole school, probably. So he did not realize he was not white. And I don't know what kind of experience he had in school, but he first time he realized was he went to a summer camp, and where there are lots of Asian kids there. So he suddenly realized that he is he's Asian, he has a different culture, and also there are other children like him, and he has peers like that. So I think it's very, very important that our school provide a comprehensive picture of our history.
Thank you, Dr. Shen. And what about Jill or Rahul? Do you want to chime in on this question?
I just want to echo the idea of comprehensive. When I encounter people, and because at the museum we do train teachers around the state, and we've trained teachers around the country in Asian American studies content, I get a lot of times, oh, you're just about CRT. That's the new thing, right? And I say, I'm sorry, I never read critical race theory. I never went to law school. But I can tell you what I'm interested in is a more honest picture of our nation. And that is a comprehensive picture. It's a more honest, comprehensive picture. So thank you. Thank you for saying that.
And I would echo, I guess it was particularly striking to me in the years, there were a number of years when I was teaching and going to graduate school in Baltimore, Maryland, in a city that was 65% Black. And you could overlay the most recent census with the red line maps, which supposedly expired with the end of the neighborhood covenants and some of those things in the late 40s, but you could still see exactly where everybody had been probably 50, 100 years before. And to have kids understand, you can, and this is my probably social studies perspective, as a humanities person who studied history and literature for so many years, it is story.
Jill, you suddenly got muted.
Sorry, I said it is stories that can draw people in, and stories that often draw kids in much more than bar graphs, especially K through 12. I really think that is the case, and I still remember providing an assignment. It was in one of my U.S. history classes. And so it would have been 11th and 12th graders. And the assignment was really to ask around in their families and see whether they had anyone in their family who could say, oh, I participated in something that was, historically notable, was the way I think I put it. And then as there were kids who were just shrugging their shoulders and said, our family's never done anything historical. My family's African American. Well, we can't even trace, our family history. But I had kids from particular backgrounds and two that I asked to read their stories, read their sort of short narratives, because. And these kids were classmates and they were teammates, and they truly had never seen this kind of perspective on one another's background. One kid was white, and his father had been a National Guardsman called up during the riots following and began his protest and turned into let's burn down sections of the city following Dr. King's death. Spring of 68. And there was another kid who was a senior in high school, whose father was a senior in high school. It was a Black kid. And they were describing the same 3 days from the different communities, and the kids were just staring at each other like, oh my gosh, yes, here is a city where issues of race and class and religion so dominate the thinking. And did it open up, huge possibilities for discussions in that section, even more than in any of the other sections that year. And it's that sense of, Jasmit, I think it was you who said, to see the ways in which we otherize one another, and also to see the ways in which we share that experience. I was living in Seattle, and I can't remember what the event was. It really affected more deeply. I want to say it had to do with a labor movement, and it was recent. Latine people protesting, and as I'm driving down toward I think of it as 5 points, so I must have been coming down 12th, and onto Jackson. There's a stretch where there were a lot of Vietnamese restaurants at the time. This is probably 20 years ago, and I saw this one car pulled into the parking lot of this one. It was like a Vietnamese restaurant supply. And you could tell the guy wasn't sure whether he should be there. They were looking for parking so they could walk to the protest, basically. And there was this long line of cars behind him, and everybody was sort of paused, like, is it okay for us to be here? And, the business owner comes out And he's like, you could tell it was just like the silent movie. What's going on? But he goes over and he talks to the guy, and the guy's like explaining why they're there. And the guy was like, sure. You could just see him. Yeah. Come on in. He goes out and he's like directing all the cars, and all these protesters were able to park their cars in his parking lot. And they're all getting out, and they're talking to each other, and they're talking to the business owner. And, I went on down, and it took me several cycles to get through the light. But to me, that is an example of the ways in which, people who don't understand the exact story, but can understand that experience of how we stand together because we have to. To me, that's part of what is sort of American culture, maybe the better parts of American culture, and I think is what is so essential about a curriculum that's blended in with all the other parts of K through 12 education. So, wow, this is a soapbox subject for me, so I'm just gonna.
No, I definitely appreciate you sharing that viewpoint, and I absolutely agree that the stories and history should be integrated and blended in so many disciplines and subjects. It could, there are stories and voices in literature, and so much of U.S. history that our K through 12 students don't learn about, and so that is, as you may or may not know, the effort behind Make Us Visible is we're trying to combat anti-Asian American bullying and racism through education as the only long-term solution. So I absolutely agree with you, and I think many in this space would agree that it starts with education and ensuring that it's comprehensive, it's thoughtful, and so thank you for sharing. Jasmit, did you want to chime in on the question?
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to everyone, and what couple of things were coming to my mind. Again, experiences, shared experiences, and I remember my kids coming to me one day, and they've been through high school out here in Olympia High School, and there's only like one paragraph about South Asian, as if they don't exist in the entire American experience. And that's very unfortunate, right? And I said, so what are you going to do about it? Right. And they're like, what can we do about it? I'm like, you have to think how you're going to change that. Right. So they went and spoke to their history teacher, and lo and behold, the history teacher has allowed them every year to come and present to all his classes. So I think that's something. I know the onus again comes to the community to do that, but that's one way that I saw some personal sort of initiative that could change the things. And when they came to me, they said, you talk about the Sikhs having been here since the late 1800s. There's not even a mention, right? And you talk about Dalip Singh Saund being the first Asian American congressman who was elected to Congress. There's no mention of that in our history books. So what is it that we can celebrate if that is not taught in our history text? And then I went around and I collected history books from a bunch of different school districts out here, Kent, Renton, and all. And yes, even though those districts are so diverse, right? Olympia, I understand it's not that diverse, but if I compare that with some other school districts that are very diverse, that text doesn't exist. And so there's a conscious effort that we need to do as community activists to change that in this state, right? That should not be something that we are subjecting our generations of students who are going through schooling and never actually come to hear about those experiences, or about the Filipinos, like Rahul, you were mentioning, right? That's an important thing that should be a part of our regular textbooks about their experiences. So thank you for bringing this question up.